Sharon, thank you so much for the gift of your time and presence. It is truly a privilege to be in conversation with you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. This is very exciting and interesting, so I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. The first question I wanted to ask you is if you could tell us a little bit about the tradition you are a part of, or you have been mostly part of, and who is your teacher?
Okay, lovely. My beloved teacher, my root teacher, is just Shante, and my husband and I have been with him for 24 years. And I've had many wonderful teachers in my life, Native American, a lot of Buddhist teachings. A lot of my training was Buddhist. Advaita, Zhong Klein was a teacher of ours. But Aja is the root teacher and my deepest love. He came from the Zen tradition, but he says he woke up out of Zen. And so I think that was the, very karmic connection with him, but also just our heart's desire, our heart's love was to be with the teacher that could point out the natural state that we all are, and then help maneuver through without a lot of overlay of different teachings and rules and this and that, and those are all wonderful, but they were very much, I think, brought forth and laid down as law, but much of it was cultural and historical and, much like that. So his hallmark, I would say, was a profound transmission, and the other was extremely clear and simple and precise language. So it was just the perfect way for my husband and I, and we had put out a big prayer, and that's our connection with him was that response to that prayer.
You just mentioned transmission. Can you tell us a little bit about what transmission is?
In my experience, the transmission really is where it's at. Because if the teacher that you're sitting with realizes and lives from their divine nature, the natural state, whatever we call that each tradition is guiding us to remember, the transmission is without concepts and without dharma. And because it moves from the awake teacher, and then it touches that is within us that still may be somewhat asleep, and then it wakes it up. It's like, one of my teachers, Zhong Klein, called it the transmission of the flame. And I think that's a really beautiful description. Now, many, especially I think Americans, because we're so mental, we tend to always look for the words and then often see if the words, the languaging, matches up with the words inside of our head. And if it does, then it's a good teaching, and if it doesn't, then it's a bad teaching, and whatever the mind says about all of that. But the truth is that the transmission is before and beyond the words and the dharma and any kind of mind expectations or memory. So his was deeply, deeply grounded in the silent ground, the primordial ground, the essence of everything. And yet it also included this brilliance, this kind of luminosity, the reality that pervades within all things and all people. The enlightenment by the 10,000 things. So he was very brilliant in both the deep silence and also the luminosity, the brilliance that includes all life. And then very simple language, very precise, very clear language, and a very humble human. You know, the whole scene of I'm the teacher and, you know, lay your feet on, or your head on my feet, just wasn't a part of that. He started very young. He was in his early 30s when he was asked to teach. He was very dedicated to his teacher, who was a Zen teacher in her own right, for 14 years. And I respect that. You know, he really was devoted and listened and was aligned with her. And finally, after her teaching for 30 years, she said, finally, someone who can take over. So then he began to teach, and very quickly, you know, became quite well known. And he would do online work, and people from China and Pakistan and Africa and, you know, all over the world would attend his online teachings. So I'm just extraordinarily grateful at
Thank
this
you.
relationship.
Yes, that was wonderful. Thanks. I have watched a few of your talks, which are very, very inspiring. And it is clear from them that you have had experiences of awakening, of merging back into the true nature, or as you call it, a state of no self.
Yes.
And these being progressive states of unfoldment. I know it would be a lot to ask, but perhaps you can share with us a glimpse of those stages or those states with us.
Meaning of the awakening
Yeah.
unfolding. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I think that if we can look back in our childhood, and I would say that was certainly true here, that sense of well-being and wholeness and completion, kind of a sense of all is well, that was shining through and out of time and space. That in most cases that was shining through children, and then through whatever our training and what, you know, came in our lives, our conditioning, our karma, our dharma, whatever form it came in, then it was sort of covered over. And here, I can give you my personal experience. I can remember I was in 4th grade and I was walking from the teacher's desk back to my desk, and this question popped up of like, who's Sharon? And then that was sort of the collapse. And then being lost in the dream, even though I am clairvoyant and a strong dreamer. So beings and teachings, I always called them my teaching dreams, insights, guidance would come through my dreams, and that didn't go away. But for me, that was just a natural way that I was. So then, as those glimpses became more frequent, and here it was, at the same time, the personality was going through very deep depression. You know, by then I had a child, I was married, I was in suburbia, you know, the whole thing. And, but something wanted to shine through, and it just wasn't conducive or supported in the life that I was leading. So, you know, there were different circumstances. I'm sure you see that in yourself, that everything is perfectly guided, everything is perfectly on time. And for here, that was absolutely true, continues, of course, to be true. So due to just certain circumstances, the bleeding through or the kind of breaking through my normal identity of myself as my thoughts, they just started to become more frequent. And though I didn't understand really what a teacher particularly was, something in me knew that that would be of great benefit. So again, just perfectly in time, perfect location, conversation with a friend, then Trungpa Rinpoche, which is another Tibetan teacher, lived like, hour and a half away from where I lived. So I just got in the car and drove over and sit with him. And I didn't understand really a word he was saying, but again, the transmission. And I heard what was coming through. And so I just wanted to go deeper and deeper into that. So really, I would say just through multiple teachers, lovely, wonderful teachers. I've had a wonderful experience really with all of my teachers. And there was something that I was born with that just could feel or sense. If it was true and it resonated with the truth within me, then I drew closer. Mm-hmm. And I would do whatever it took to make that connection happen with that particular teacher. If I felt it just wasn't resonating with my own inner truth, then I just moved away. I didn't think that they were bad or good or anything about them. It just wasn't it didn't resonate with me. So the deeper I went into meditation, and that was my practice, though I've received many Tibetan empowerments in my life, when I first heard that meditation was a way that you could directly contact the wisdom, God within, the spirit, then that was for me. Though I loved Jesus, I loved God, I didn't have these ideas that one was better than the other, but one seemed to be more direct. So I took more of the direct road. So many years of 10-day retreats, again, Vipassana, they were very clean teachers at the time. Jack Kornfield, just Sharon Salzberg, wonderful, clean, high integrity type teachers. And so I just signed up for as many retreats as my life would allow. And each time, though it was a very important step, was to get the training and the concentration of mind. If I just sit in silence and I concentrated my mind, then it would just open up. At that time, it wasn't the dark silence that opened, though that did open. It was more of the brilliance and the divine and sort of the everything and the holy presence. So, and I went through what most people go through, which is you get it and then you lose it. And when you get it, you're in ecstasy, and when you lose it, then you're depressed. And so I'd sign up for another retreat. And so I guess what I'm saying, I'm giving you my own experience, but I have worked with people. I've been teaching for 21 years. And then before that, I was just like obsessed with how does one awaken and how does one live this and how does one, be, in a sense, rather than a fleeting experience, it was a constant. And that, of course, was what this life was being led by. So the more there would be deeper and deeper glimpses, the glimpses would last longer. And though there was still a sense that even though they were very deep and really quite profound experiences, I'm kind of a big experiencer, they didn't remain. So something knew that was a glimpse, but it wasn't the abiding. So again, with my teacher, Adyashanti, and it was at a retreat. I'd been with him maybe for a year and a half, something like that. And he asked me to do a satsang for the Sangha. And I was just beyond terrified. I mean, just beyond terrified. I was always a very shy personality. I couldn't speak very clearly. I was so intuitive and kind of up and out. But I loved him so much, and I loved what was coming through. So something in me just said yes, and if you make a fool of yourself, then you make a fool of yourself. And so as I was stepping up to all these sophisticated California, amazing, students from everywhere. And here I was, sitting in front of him and not even sure why. Then I just sit down. It all opened up. The first thought was, all the teachers are right. It isn't the ego that wakes up. It isn't the person. It's beyond, up and out. And that is the awakening. It sees itself. And then that comes back out of love and settles into this life to liberate and to clarify until the complete absorption, if you want to call it that, the Buddhist calls it the no-self, actually then can live the life. And the human is free to be human. It doesn't have to look the same and act the same, but it's free. And so sometimes, I'm sure you've read many stories of crazy wisdom or awake saints, or that they do these really bizarre and strange things, but that's how it moves through them.
Right.
And how it moves through this, of course, is totally unique.
Mm.
So, I guess what you're asking is glimpses of movement towards what is awakening within this body-mind structure. It wants to know itself through this, and then it will do whatever it takes.
Mm. Oh, that was beautiful. And during the stages at the beginning, when you had those stages of going in and then going out, during the stages of going in this ecstasy or experience of the whole, were you still functioning in the world, or were you a bit kind of removed?
It's sort of interesting. I'm sure you're seeing it with the people that you've been talking with, or your own experience. Used to, you were in a monastery or you were in a cave and you had a teacher that guided you through the steps and stages. And though I had a profound teacher, and meditation was the most constant teacher, I just did it. Mother, wife, kids, work, garden, house, whatever it was. And some of the phases were really, to the ego, profoundly painful. And the other was the way I had functioned as myself as a separate person was gone. I remember Aja, my teacher, saying, you're in another world. And it has different functions, it has different sort of laws, different ways of being, and you don't get it until, sure enough, you're in a different world. And you just have to learn to move through it. At that time, he had a lot of tapes at that time, and I was living in a rural area, so I just listened to lots of tapes when I'd be going through something that the mind had no idea what was happening, how this life was functioning, nothing, except there was this sense of awareness, spirit, God, whatever you want to call our shared natural state. It knew exactly what was happening, and it was the guide, and it was the current that was opening up moment by moment. And because I was an intuitive personality, and I didn't have a lot of training from my family or cultural training, I listened to that current. My husband, who was deeply dedicated on the path, had no idea what I was talking about. Women friends or other friends that I normally would talk to that had spiritual backgrounds, they had no idea what I was talking about. So very quickly, I just learned to listen to what was in front of me, and the tapes of my teacher, I'd plop in, and it was exactly my question and what I was trying to work through. was on that recording. And then we went back to California and went to retreats, as many as we possibly could go to. So lots and lots of help, lots and lots of training, but fundamentally, you have to learn to listen to what's unfolding within you, because that's what you're looking for, is that beingness. You know, it's moving through you. It isn't the person that's getting it and not getting it. It translates into the person, it permeates into the ego structure, but it's always spirit, awareness, beingness itself that's running the whole show, and that's permeating the whole life until it fully is embodied.
How important.
Pardon?
How important what you're sharing right now, how fundamental.
I'm not quite sure what you're saying.
I'm just saying that I'm so grateful that what you're sharing right now. It seems that to be so important and so fundamental for many people who are in this path to hear.
It's totally fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
It really, and it's missed a lot. You know, it's we still think that there is someone getting it or not getting it, and then the corresponding thoughts that go along with getting it. And for some people it's pride, for other people it's, you know, who knows what, being special.
Right.
Of course, what you learn is the hierarchy is gone, because we all come from the same root and we all arise as the same luminosity that then creates itself in the myriad of forms. There's nobody that it's not. There's just some body-mind structures mysteriously and with great grace receive it and will not turn back. That's what I see so much as a teacher, is there are those who will just whatever it asks. And there are those that as far as they possibly can take it, and then it's too much. Because, you know, none of us signed up for absorption back into the greater being. We all wanted to be better people, and we wanted to be loved and to love everybody, and, you know, all the great teachings we've all received. But the truth is, if it's taken to the embodiment, the abiding, the being, then it fully embodies the body-mind structure. The body-mind structure is absorbed back into itself. And no one signs up for that, because you don't really get it until it starts to happen. And that phase, and if I could just say that, because I see so many people that are at that phase where you just have to say, yes. I don't know what I'm saying yes to, but something is calling to say yes. And many, many, many spiritual practitioners pull away after that place. And at first I thought, oh, go for it, you know, don't do that, da 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 da. And then I realized that it's compassion. That's as far as it can go right now.
While you were talking before, you mentioned that some in part of these stages were crashing to the ego. And I was wondering if this is a process that is more internal or is paired with external experiences as well.
When you said crashes,
crashing to the
of
ego.
awareness into the ego,
Yes.
and that's some of the challenges I was speaking of.
Yes.
You know, I can only speak of my own experience, and again, I've sat with, you know, hundreds and hundreds and probably of people at this point, is quite unique how it works for people. For me, gradual, and then a hurricane and a tsunami and an explosion. That's how it was. For many people, it's glimpse and glimpse and glimpse. It gets more stabilized. There's more of a relaxation within the personality that allows it, and then actually starts to welcome it, because now it knows, you know, what it's kind of signed up for. And so it often can be very gradual. It's just kind of like something melting. And then maybe almost in hindsight, there's a realization that you're no longer who you thought you were, that that identity has shifted from the separate sense of me into that that is whole, or the beingness. Here, there was a fierceness at a certain point, and whatever supported and stimulated that sense of wholeness, that sense of brilliance, that sense of at home, content, I did whatever that asked for. And here, and it's different for everyone, it was deep meditation. And deep meditation with a teacher that was awake.
Hmm.
And I still, after all these years, and people say, oh, I just woke up and I'm fine and I don't need any guidance or anything, or, you know, they don't read anything from the great masters to stabilize. They just go, boom, that's it. It really most always goes awry. And so even though I think we've moved out of the guru scene, maybe that's good, but to have a teacher and a guide and something to lean on, I think no matter if it's gradual or no matter if it's a kind of a big explosion like it was here.
You repeat that these are different experience, and these experiences differ for each person.
It's quite unique. I
Yeah.
think it's one of the great challenges that, quote, practitioners have, or students, whatever you want to call that temporary searching, is that we compare it with what we've read and we compare it with other people. I'm of the generation that when it came in to the US, to the West, it was, you know, all Eastern teachers and all Eastern experiences. And so, you know, we were taught that, you know, you just woke up and then you were brilliant, and, you know, you could walk through the jungle with, you know, a little dhoti, whatever on, and, you know, the jungle plants and animals, you know, bowed down. I mean, we were just taught it was so high and exquisite, and, you know, it didn't really, and all the thoughts weren't real, and, you know, all of that. So I think when the realization in our own experience, and perhaps it was because we were from the West and everything was so mental and dense here, that you know, it just took a long time to unfold and untie, and then it's current. You know, I think sometimes when you study the old traditions, and I'm certainly one of those and love them and love to read about them, I had a sense that it was set. And though there are fundamental teachings that are set, for sure, everyone finds the same thing fundamentally, but that there wouldn't be an evolution. I just didn't think about evolution. And at this point, I'm starting to see that there is this evolution. You know, Sri Aurobindo and Sweet Mother, that was their whole work. How it used to be, we were taken care of, we were in monasteries, we were guided, we were supported, and now we just blow open and wherever we are. And, you know, it unwinds and reveals itself in whatever situation you find yourself in. And you can have 5 kids and be a CEO, or it doesn't matter. It's going to come through in its own timing and in its own way.
Hmm. You
So,
mentioned a few times um, how this awakening happens according to the karmic conditioning or
yeah.
the inner makeup. And I seem to remember you saying that, you know, those who do well in emptiness and those who do well in love, or the experiences being slightly different, but then coming into the same place.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can you speak a little bit about the difference between those two, emptiness and love, if I understood correctly?
If you could repeat that last question, just the
Yes.
last.
So if you could speak a little bit about that difference between emptiness and love.
Ah, yeah. That's my favorite subject. People that I sit with, they go, okay, we're going to talk about emptiness and love, you know. But, you know, that's it. If you don't get that, you will not understand and be able to live your understanding. And here, again, I heard the word emptiness and I heard the word void. Most of my training was in Buddhism, and frankly, it wasn't very appealing. It's like, yeah, I like, you know, the lights and the brilliance and the presence and, you know, whatever, visions. But it just came at one retreat, the emptiness, and just revealed itself. And I had the chance to ask my teacher, it was in a group, and I told him what was happening. And he said, well, I've never experienced that myself, but I think that he said, I'm pretty sure the way you're describing it, that's the deep emptiness and the deep void. And I just went, oh no, that is not what I wanted. Because at that point, it was just sort of revealing itself, you know, it was just sort of the beginning of it. And I was used to, like I said, light and presence and, you know, beauty and bliss. But it didn't go away, and it knew itself to just keep revealing itself in my experience. And so over a period of time, it was like almost like touching the edge of the deep, dark, silent, empty ground. And all emptiness means is there's no separate identification, right? It's the ground and the inclusion of everything in all places and all situations, all experiences. There's no exception to that. So then over time, then the whole being, the whole body, the whole atmosphere then was infused with this dark ground. And the more one was embodied or just held and infused by this primordial ground, the more there was a sense of home, content, all potentialities available here, and all is perfect. There's not a thing out of place. But it didn't include the everything, right? It didn't include the luminosity, the sense of being held and informed, and I call it the great creatrix, the great mother, the great body, the luminosity, you know, love. It's love. And that on its own, just as the emptiness. Now I made it available by going to retreats and being silent and a great longing. You know, I think desire and longing is quite different. And the longing just wanted to know, I always just called it God. I just want union with God. And eventually, instead of out here, it was discovered within. And then, of course, the within and the without totally dissolves. So then love, which is not separate, luminosity, not separate, the great creatrix, the great mother, not separate, it arises in this great mystery, is the dynamic aspect of silence. And it just simply arises and it begins to create itself in the multitude of form because it wants to know itself in all form, in all things, in all places. It's the natural state. So the tendency, according to karmic influences, preferences, you know, some prefer the empty void because they really don't like people much. They really don't want to be in relationship, frankly. So in this, they can just hang out, right? Because it's no one interferes with it. So there's old teaching statement, you get stuck in emptiness. And I would meet people like this, and I go, oh gosh, there's this whole world here, and but you're dismissing it or negating it. But here, the emptiness revealed itself over a long period of time, and then it became where I was immersed in and as that. And then naturally, love, not the Valentine love, but love, the great creatrix, just arose. And it began to reveal itself in all people and all places, in all things. So you realize because there's another personality tendency is I'm just into love.
Right.
I'm a bliss and love and, groovy and relationships and, and blah, 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 blah. But there's no root there. There's no fundamental ground there. But when you really see it for what it is, it's one whole being. But one is still and the other is the dynamic stillness in creation. And it arises and it falls back into itself. The great anicca, the great change that all, especially Buddhist teachings, point to. So it's still and it's constantly changing and moving at the same moment. And that, I think if I could say anything, the great, gratitude isn't really enough. The recognition that it's all unfolding as itself in perfect timing and perfect situations, and it will settle or rest, if you want to call it that, when there's the complete absorption. At a certain point, there seems like there's someone who's really trying and efforting, and that seems to be required. You've got to be there. You've got to show up, moment by moment by moment by moment. And then there's a moment that is taken over, that it just takes over the great presence, the great holy being itself. And then this life is being lived by and through the human, and the spirit is that is the truth and the life. And whether you're fixing a cup of tea, or whether you're talking in front of a group, whether you're a healer, a scientist, a seer, a poet, it doesn't matter, an artist, it all just expresses as itself through this beautiful expression called the human. It's a beautiful, 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 beautiful recognition. It's worth everything. And it asks everything. And that's a little bit of the challenge. That's a little bit of the challenge.
You mentioned embodiment at some point,
Yeah.
and body and mind being reabsorbed.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how you connect that, if you connect that with the feminine aspect, or the feminine path of awakening, or the feminine way.
Yeah, people tell me that because, really as a very small child, I would hear, when I started hearing stories that in order to wake up and to live it, then you had to, dismiss your children. If you were with the husband, you couldn't be with the husband or wife. You couldn't live in the community. You couldn't, everything was a distraction. And something in here, and I think each individual has a specific dharma. You know what I'm saying? It's a specific way that only can come through this unique, creation called me. And I think here it was always a sense that it can be lived in the family, in the community, in the female body, in the male body, whatever it is. Why would it just choose one vehicle? Why would it choose just, one way of living your life? So there was almost like a kind of a rebellion against that I had to step out of, everything. I understand the attachment to those roles. Those have to be given up. They do. There's no way out of that one. But it isn't that you have to, live a certain ascetic kind of way of being. So your question about it being more feminine, I guess it is, though I don't make that distinction myself at all. It was just that, again, it wasn't anyone that pointed it out. My teacher, in fact, I talked to him about it, and he said, it's just sort of not my area, but go for it. I realized that the cells within the body, there was this layer that was more of the conditioned body, right? And it held the non-resolution on the karmic wheel. And at a certain point you come in and, it's to resolve that. Because, literally you step out of the karmic wheel. You just don't keep, running that same separate delusion. But I realized by just meditation, just turning in, that there was like that the body, the cells in the body were unimaginably empty. There was just this dark, silent, mysterious, infinite ground in the cells, in this body. And then it began to reveal that there also was the radiance and the luminosity, love, in this body, in every body, in every form. So the more I just began to experience that, and I tried in the retreats or, when I was with a group of people to sort of evoke that, but it really was not easily received. So that's what my meditations were often about. Mm. Sometimes they would be, more silent, and then other times they would be more radiant and brilliant, and other times just like a shine or luminosity. So it just started to dawn that we are made up of that in this body, in these bones, in this blood, in these organs, of the same divine silence and brilliance as the Himalayas. There was no difference. And then the in and the out, that is in this experience when that all fell away. So there wasn't like only in and there wasn't only out, it just was one being. And the moment brought that out. So that's what I call embodiment. Though it's kind of the thing now, there's a lot of people that are into embodiment. But when they talk about it, it's often like there's a physical practice and, they become aware of the subtle body, because we're all made up of the same subtle anatomy. But at the same time, the cellular wholeness and perfection really wasn't pointed out much. So I can only say how it was here. So then what that changed in my living of the natural state was an intimacy. I wasn't subtly reaching for something more empty or subtly reaching for something more brilliant or perfect or more whole, or it was this subtle more. Because it was a little bit due to, right, circumstances. And when it woke up in the cells, same depth of the void and emptiness, same brilliance and luminosity, then I was home in the body exactly as it is in this moment, exactly as it is. So it became very intimate. And though I know this realization is intimate, I mean, is infinite, so there's no place to land and no place to claim and no place to, now I've arrived. One of the great, great, great obstacles is that still unfolds, but it's always with a very deep and intimate sense of here, home, body, as it is. Is that helpful?
Yes, that is very helpful. Yes, and actually the distinction that you made um, of this embodiment and how you experienced it. And while you were talking, I was thinking, what happens with the pettiest parts of the ego? For example, for you, is there still, do you see a movement of, like jealousy or competition or ambition? Are those parts there, but you don't engage, or they're gone?
For when the essential shift happened, it never, that seeing, that witness, that watching, whatever word you want to use, that awakeness, that never ever closed off.
Mm.
And there were times where I really wanted that light to shut down, because it was just like a spotlight and it was just on everything that it was not. And sometimes the liberation, the arising of deep-seated pain and conditioning would just be like an explosion. And I'd been working for many years, in all different ways and traditions and, body work and, all sorts of things. So it wasn't like I had never touched those deep wounds or conditionings before. But when that, the universal light turns on, then it's going to blow up everything. And it did. And so there were periods that it was, my personality found really quite painful. I didn't ever want to turn away from it. There's something that knew, dive in. But it didn't mean that it wasn't very, very painful. And there was a belief that that was who I was. It was an identity. But when I started to realize the identity comes up with the conditioning, but we're so used to that, quote, identity, then we collapse into the identity. This is me, rather than a conditioning that took place karmically or, in this incarnation, wherever you want to, it's all memory. It's all gone. It doesn't exist. But, we're here to, it seems as if, to bring that forth, to make it conscious. What has been so denied, because we simply couldn't deal with it at the time. So it's, totally, it's a loving act. It's like, okay, sweetie, we're just going to put it over here until you're able to really be with it. So when that period, and it went on for probably 2 to 3 years, where it was pretty fierce. And then I just started to notice that something else was not identifying with it, but it was no longer filtered by a Sharonness and her identity. It was just pure seeing, pure awareness of what was arising. And sometimes an identity went with it, but it wasn't like then there was a collapse into the identity. It was just pure seeing. And the recognition that love, that we are made up of, was the fire that burnt the deepest, deepest roots of all the conditioning. And we contain all of it. We think we're nice, spiritual, good people. But when you wake up to your nature, you also realize that the murderer, the rapist, the robber, that has been the victim, that has been the perpetrator, the whole thing reveals itself. So when all of that was really being revealed, that it was then it was perceived by pure awareness. rather than sort of one foot still, identified as the me and the other always awake and seeing. It just, and it was in hindsight, all of a sudden there was just a noticing that one that was, talking about it and pushing it and identifying with it. And, I see people that now they're like, well, I'm a victim of whatever, whatever. It's like a identity or a blue ribbon or something. And so it's one of the delusions that I'm seeing now in sanghas, individuals. But for whatever reason, I just call it you're taken. And that one foot here and one foot there, going back and forth, it just stopped. And then you become a transmuter, if you want to call it that, of all of the delusion of separation and suffering on the planet. You become a healer or a transmuter. There's probably another more precise description. And it isn't like a mission and now you're special and you're doing it for all these poor slobs that don't get it. There's nothing like that. It's just like you realize you're interconnected. And Buddha and Jesus and all the great beings that ever woke up said, what has happened here? I am doing for you, and you will be even greater. And that's one of the later, more mature shifts that I see, is truly the recognition that you are not separate from all that is arising and all that's on the planet, both horrible and beautiful. It doesn't mean you slide in and then you become, the hell realm. You open to the hell realm as awake awareness. And then you become a transformative light or transformative presence. I don't know, those are words, they all kind of disappear there. The great Kuan Yin, she entered in, I don't know, depending which story you read, like 3 realms of hell, one after the other. And but she entered as full awake, full light. There was no longer the delusion of separation. So I think you're asking, does it continue this unfolding? And at least here it does. There's insights, and I see certain very subtle ways of denial and pushing away, and I call them my old friends, my old echoes from the past. But there's not the belief. It's just like, oh, sweetheart, that's just that. And then it arises, and then it dissolves. Now, maybe there's a certain point, that it will no longer arise in any way, but I can't say that that's fully true here. But it's a totally different perspective, and that's night and day.
I think we could listen to you the whole day.
Thank you. Your questions are really thoughtful and well designed, and I appreciate it. I know I'm a storyteller.
And that is wonderful. It's truly appreciated. One final question.
Yes.
About the mind, and as we awaken into these stages, at some point you mentioned how tricky it can be. There can be like a false sense of abiding, for example, or that the mind can project certain things and
Yes.
become a complete obstacle. Can you speak about that a little?
The mind, and it's often a spiritual mind, because really, if you look at the mind, and I know the Asian definition of mind is the great mind, and our definition is the thoughts.
Yes.
So using more of the Western definition. So fundamentally, the mind reflects, all right? And so the more spiritual glimpses and experiences you have, then the more the mind goes, I'm a spiritual, whatever, fill in the blanks. And because it's the best experience you can ever have, then the mind tries to grab it. And then also, it's very, very precious, these glimpses and recognitions, because this is what this life is all about, right? When you begin to wake up to your nature, that's all you want. Everything else falls short. And so is the full focus. And there's a collaboration. This isn't always true, but usually of the personality. The personality now gets on board and it becomes a spiritual personality. And so the mind is reflecting spiritual experiences. It's a big trap. Because then rather than pure awareness, which is unique and appropriate for the moment and shifts as it's called forth in different ways, more deep silence, more love, inclusion, more relating, more precise, linear function, to run the equipment or do whatever you need to do. So it isn't like one, I'm spiritual like this all the time. It's unique in the moment. Well, when the mind grabs it, and now I've arrived, I am at a certain phase or stage, and I've never met anyone that doesn't go through this. You start to notice that it's dead. It doesn't have life. It doesn't have, the unique expression of itself. And so it becomes one tone. So then you start to go, the mind grabbed it. So then you open, relax, let it come in, and then it sort of resets itself. Now, some personalities never come out of that. And then in most cases, they either just grab it and find like a little circle that they can talk about it and everyone agrees on the same thing, and then they're okay. Or they just say, oh, that's it for spirituality. Yeah, it never works, I'm not into it. Or one of the phases now is like, I don't need a teacher, I'm just living my life in the ordinary way and blah, blah, blah. So whatever the concepts are, that's just the way that goes. But often what happens is the mind starts to see that this unknown, this dissolution of the separate sense of me is dying. It gets a precursor. And so depending on how conditioned and how you're wired up, there's going to be like, this is the dissolution of me. Or, I don't know what that is. And the mind has no way of knowing what that is. So something, and I still don't understand exactly what that is, says yes anyway. And then it falls into what it is, and all separate sense of identity is resolved and dissolved. And of course, it's what you've always wanted. It's why we're born. But many just simply can't say yes. And so then either the controls come in much stronger, or the mental concepts come in much stronger, or you get other people that are kind of, having the same experiences, and you can kind of affirm it to each other. I think when I tried to talk about it with my friends, they were very genuine, very dedicated, but it wasn't the dissolution of the separate me. It was more of a spiritual me. And that was Buddhist, shamanism, Sufi. I had several friends that were in different traditions. And, the dissolution of the separate me was not a part of the program. I don't know why, because that's the whole deal. The tradition that I was trained in for many years, Vipassana, they never would mention enlightenment, and let alone the no self. It was a taboo. So I think that's why they just thought I went off the bend or I was being whatever. And so they can relate to what I was saying. So there's many ways that you just stop that unfolding. But I've always took to heart what my teacher said, and he just said it's a done deal. Now, it may be another 100 incarnations.
You know, Sharon, oh, go ahead.
Once it starts moving in you, it will not stop until it fully is abiding and resides. And you might as well relax and say yes, even though you don't know what you're saying yes to.
Thank you. That has been so clarifying, and it was exactly what I was asking you about.
Good,
As I
good.
was reading about you and watching some of your talks, and now that you're talking, your story and your experience reminds me a lot of the story of Bernadette Roberts, who was
Uh-huh.
a
I
Christian
love
mystic,
writing. Yeah.
and she wrote the books, The Experience of No Self, or The Path to
Yes.
No Self.
It's
And
one of
she
my
said,
favorites.
and so you came across her. Very few people have, uh, very few people know about her.
Yeah,
And
that's true. And she's one of the rare ones that writes with any clarity about the absorption and the no self. You know, the other is couched in sutras and poetry, right? And she
exactly.
just laid it out.
So are you thinking about writing about that which nobody talks about? Several times in your talks, you say nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about this. Are you thinking about perhaps writing about these experiences?
You know, I don't. I'm a biblioholic. I read all the time. And I must say that I don't always read only spiritual books. I read many other books. So I love the written word, but in my own world or in my own
Mhm.
way, it just never is a strong consideration. I've had offers, and maybe, as you're saying, that there's a kind of, I don't know how to say it, it's being, it's more lived over a longer period of time. And so maybe then it could be offered
Mhm.
other than in the retreats and one on one. So perhaps, but no, it's never been a real strong pull for me. I mean, the people who assist me have to hit me over the head to write anything. But, you know, that's just my own resistance.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time, for your wisdom. It's been truly delightful, and I
Thank
know
you.
this is going to be very helpful for a lot of people. So thank you.
May it be so. Thank you for your service. You have a beautiful presence. I really like sort of interweaving with you.
Yeah, me too. I think stories are
Been a
powerful
delight.
when we share them. Thank you, and I hope I can meet you in person at some point. Thank you so much for being
Lovely.
with us today.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you very much.
All right.